What's going on, folks? My name's Kaotic, as I'm sure you know. For those that have been listening for a long time, I'd first and foremost like to thank you for all of your support. And, a lot of that's given me the, courage to continue with my music. And I'm 32 years old. I started doing hip hop when I was 13, started writing poetry when I was like 8 or something. And, so I've been doing this for roughly 19 years, and I wasn't good at first, but eventually got good, and after a period of time began to accumulate some listeners, and after making a large amount of music, over 1,400 songs, I've came to look back and look at a lot of my music, and with a lot of my songs that I did make, I would make the music during a time, let's say, for example, I had a bad week at work or something, or there's somebody that I didn't like, and I would make a song about them, and, or I was, interpersonal relationships, be it friends, family, loved ones, all different kinds of things, a lot of times that I was frustrated, I would make music. And one of the things that's magical about music is it could be viewed as emotion in a bottle, which to me, ultimately, when I think of music and I hear a song that I made 3 years ago, be it a positive song or a negative song, it's as if the music is bottled up, and you put a lid on that bottle, and years later you'll listen to that same song, be it the artist that made the song or the listener that relates to the song. You listen to that, and then you open that bottle up and it lets all that energy, so whether that be positive energy or whether that be negative energy, that emotion in a bottle quality about music is something that's very powerful. And throughout the years, I never, growing up, I was raised in a Catholic household, and, from the time that I was in preschool, I went to, St. Bede's for preschool, and I was in PSR. For those that don't know what that is, it's just, religion classes or whatever it is for children, grow up, had my first communion, I had my confirmation. And throughout all this time, since I could comprehend life, time, the passage of time, everything, one thing I noticed was the fact that I didn't necessarily believe in God when I was younger, and it really wasn't until after I made it past, there are many times I should have been dead, and there's a lot of people who have made less mistakes than me. Sometimes their first mistake, and they were taken away from us far too early. And me, on the other hand, from I'd say the ages of 13 to 22, I was just out of control. I thought I was invincible. I had no regard for, anything, be it my body or those around me. I didn't believe in God, but God, as I grew older, I began to see that over time, He has watched out for me, and even when I had no faith, He has spared me, and He's carried me through constantly, through what seems like millions of stupid decisions, probably only thousands, but that's kind of a little bit of a high number, unfortunately. So, now we're in 2016, fast forward. 3 years ago, I made a video on my YouTube called The Spiritual Awakening of Jonathan Orveth, and, some situations in life brought me to that spiritual awakening. Around that time, I began to carry a Bible with me, and I would, take it to a place that I worked, and people, this was years ago, then, and I love those people to this day, every single one of them, and I brought that Bible with me to work. And, those who I thought were my brothers and actually still are my brothers, they almost, thought it was humorous, or, I began to be ridiculed, if you will. And So shortly after that, I continued. I would bring the Bible with me. I would serve children at lunchtime, and between the lunch periods when I was serving them, I would step to the side, maybe smoke a cigarette and read the Bible. And I made it through about 80% of the Old Testament, and I fell in love, and I'm still in love. She's actually right in the other room, to a wonderful woman from Youngstown, and I now spend my time in Youngstown. I moved here. I couldn't live without her, and I still can't live without her. And here I am. And all this time, the Old Testament was left unfinished by me, if you will. And so I went in the other room. I had a box full of books, and I eventually dug that book out. And just recently, after what seems like 2.5 years or something like that, I finally dug it out. I finished reading the Old Testament, and very recently, and I just started reading the New Testament. And I'll tell you what, it's amazing. And now I've been on a spiritual journey for a while, and I've always been aware of life, death, the passage of time, how this was all created, where did we come from, and a situation, I lost my grandfather, and many people close to me, but I was there when my fiance's grandfather passed away, and, it was very difficult, for one thing. Rest in peace, John Pariza. You will be remembered, and your legacy will continue to live on. It was very noticeable at the funeral, just actually how many lives he touched. And, being there, and by this time already being a believer, and just seeing, as her older brother put it, life is fragile, and actually, being there the second that he passed, it was one of the most difficult things ever. It really, truly allows you an opportunity to put life into perspective and realize that, these days may seem long, or this winter's long, or, etc. But, ultimately, we're born and we will all pass on. And, that time got me thinking very much so about, so like, let's say, for example, I became obsessed reading about near-death experiences, and I know the definition of faith is faith in what you cannot see, but I've always been truly petrified of death, and so I began looking up these videos on near-death experiences, and just listening to everybody's testimonies. And I could have better faith, and I need more faith, and I pray for more faith, and I pray that you all get that. So that got me really looking at life, and then, that's what spurred me to read the Bible. And at this point now, I began to look, and I'm like, so what if actually I passed away? Like, let's say September 23rd, 2016, 6 days from now, I pass away. All right. How would I be remembered as? Maybe some of you watching this, might be like, oh, you'll be remembered great. You get 2 thumbs up in my book, blah, blah, blah. But, then there's others that, maybe say John was a prick. He was selfish, self-indulgent, and he could care about others more, and he was always in a hurry, and that really got me looking at the legacy of life. And at this point in time in my life, I began to seek a spiritual meaning, and aside from just spreading joy, you want to be a wonderful human being and serve Jesus. But just aside from that, thinking like how to pay it forward, is a friend of mine, Jimmy, told me. And so I've been nowadays, the last 10 days in a row, been reading the New Testament, in the morning, at nighttime, and just really trying to circle myself, with positivity, with God, responding with grace, compassion, and mercy. And this video right here is basically, I'm still far from perfect, but from this point on, after 19 years, I speak of that emotion in a bottle with my music. After 19 years, I've decided to no longer glamorize or sensationalize sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Music will still be an outlet for me, and it was a form of therapy, if you will, letting out this negative energy, so I could let that negative energy out of myself. But then it's emotion in a bottle. And then that negative energy, for somebody else that is going through a negative time, they would hear my song, and, that bottle of emotion would be opened up to the listener, and which brings me to the thought process right now, is the fact that I'm no longer trying to project negative energy to the world. And so I had a project that I was working on. It was going to be the Blue Sky LP, and it was just going to be the continuation. I put out 9 or 10 projects, and they've all been good and showcase some progression. But at this point, the Blue Sky LP and whatever I was working on, whatever project, whatever attitude or anything, image that I was trying to portray, that will now be behind me. And from this point forward, I will no longer be someone that's sensationalizing sex, drugs, and rock and roll. From this point forward in my life, I want to serve God, and I realize that God's given me these talents, and I've used those talents to serve myself, let out my frustrations, but then I give those frustrations to you, who may be watching it, and that negative energy that I put in a song, gets released to somebody else, not to sound all mumbo jumbo, but I'd rather use my God-giving talents. God gave me these talents. Why would I not use these talents to serve the one who gave me those talents in the first place? So, the Kaotic that you knew before, that sensationalized these things, will cease to exist. And after I began designing a CD cover, and after throwing out the Blue Sky LP project, my next project that I'll be working on, which will be launching the holidays of this year, 2016, is titled A Work in Progress. That is actually the title. A Work in Progress, A Sinner's Journey. Because ultimately what that signifies to me is that we are all a work in progress. Nobody is perfect. We are all learning, and where I am right now in my journey is going to be much different where I am 1 year in my journey, or 15 years in my journey. And that truly signifies that. And so ultimately, the cover, I designed it. It's a man on the sea, and it appears as if he's heading towards the sunset, and you look at the water underneath, you'll see a Bible, but it's kind of just blended into the water. And on the outline of the CD, it's like a black frame, which to me signifies a lot of the the blackness and negative energy in the world that is part of our society, if you will, that will surround us. And ultimately, even if there is the devil or whatever you may consider it to be, even if there is that, you could still head in the right direction. And so from this point, I'm sorry if you don't like my new music. I hope you do like it, and I hope it does positive, because after all this negativity that I've put forth onto the airwaves, I would like to put something positive. And and if that, it sounds cliche, but if it impacts one person and helps them, which I know that it already has, and it will impact more, but regardless, that would make it all worth it to me. So thank you who has followed me as a fan, or whatever you want to call it. in the past or just joining in, and and if I've isolated any of my demographics by talking about God, I do not regret it. And you better get used to it. And, that's fine. So, judge me. Everybody has their own opinion. And I, invite you to share your own opinion on it and formulate your own opinion. But ultimately, I know where I'm going. I know the type of energy that I want to put out. And we all have a responsibility and a duty to, someday we're going to all be gone. And when that time comes, I want to look back, positively, that I've led a legacy and set a positive example for others, and, just ultimately preach the word of Jesus and, help those around you. So, and there's a gentleman, he's from Persia, and the name that he goes by is Sati. He's 48 years old. He is a preacher at a non-denominational church in Canfield, Ohio, and I've talked to him, and one of my struggles, which makes me think of it, A Work in Progress, A Sinner's Journey, the title of the album, and I've shared my music, my recent music with him. He knows where my music was, and I've talked to him about all these negative songs that I put out through the years. What do I do with those? Do I leave them there? So, what if somebody hears that, and then it brings more negative energy into the world or whatever, and he really told me that, leave that stuff. And because that right there is a testimony to where I was, what brought me here. So ultimately, if you go back to my earliest tracks on, September, 2011, when this YouTube channel began, a lot of it, was clearly, as I said, sensationalizing sex, drugs, rock and roll, objectifying women, glorifying, drugs, and definitely not glorifying God with my early music. And so, I don't necessarily invite you to go back, thank you for tuning into my channel, but you will see the progression, of the soul, the artist, and the human being, So, and he told me an analogy about, in our life, forgiving those around you, but in addition to that, we have to learn to forgive ourselves. So our past might not be where we're going in the future. And the thing, what he told me is, there's God, there's the world, and the things you do in your past is your past, and we will all continue to make mistakes. But one thing that the devil will try to do, when he sees people going in the right direction, he'll say, like, look at this, what you did 10 years ago, or, so we let our dark pasts and our mistakes from the past, the devil will place those objects in front of us, which will ultimately distract our mind, our heart, and our soul, so even though the past is behind us, that past will attempted to be placed in front of us. So when it comes to growth, personal growth, and spiritual growth, ultimately, something that is in the past cannot stand in front of you, only if you choose to let it. So with this past in the music, it's been a wonderful journey with you guys, and I hope that you all will continue to support me, follow me, and really listen and see what you could do in the world in addition to that to help others. And I hope this video inspires you. So God bless you all, and thank you for your time. Good day.